Hello and welcome. If you can see this, it's because you're reading The Handmaid's Tale and your teacher has given you this question and you're working towards a mastery task. In the extract, how does the writer present a dystopian world? In order to succeed in the mastery task, you're going to need to make a range of points about how the writer presents a dystopian world. You're going to need to use quotations from the passage. You're going to need to talk about symbolism. That's the biggest method in this passage. And you're going to need to talk about how the symbolism says something about dystopia. So hopefully your teacher has given you the extract, and we'll read that all together in a moment. First things first, let's just recap what we know about dystopia and dystopian worlds, given that that is the question. Well, we know that dystopias commonly have an authoritarian government. That means that a dystopian society is one with harsh rules and harsh punishments. We know that there's either violence or the threat of violence constantly in a dystopian society. We know that the citizens in a dystopia live under surveillance. They do not have privacy and they do not have freedom. We know that dystopian societies involve captivity. The citizens are not free to do as they wish, or else they can be imprisoned for the slightest thing. The overriding emotion of a citizen living in a dystopia is fear. The authoritarian government makes people scared, so they will be obedient. A key idea in dystopian fiction is environmental destruction. All-pervasive technology, and the idea that your human rights and your human spirit is taken away from you, and we call that dehumanization. So that's just a recap of what you've learned in this unit, but of course, before we start reading the text, we have to remind ourselves what we're reading for. Another important thing to keep in mind when we read is that this is a unit on symbolism. This is a highly symbolic book in that it symbolizes the thoughts and feelings of June, the main character stuck in this dystopia, and also important themes and ideas about society and what makes the place dystopian. And so if you ever find English hard, it's usually because when you're reading, you have to keep all these things in mind, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So we need to keep in mind our knowledge of what a dystopia is, and also the idea that we're looking for how the passage symbolizes thoughts and feelings and symbolizes themes and ideas. So let's read the first part of the extract. Spring has now been undergone. The tulips have had their moment and are done, shedding their petals one by one like teeth. One day I came upon Serena Joy, kneeling on a cushion in the garden, her cane beside her on the grass. She was snipping off the seed pods with a pair of shears. I watched her sideways as I went past with my basket of oranges and lamb chops. She was aiming, positioning the blades of the shears, then cutting with a convulsive jerk of the hands. Was it the arthritis creeping up, or some blitzkrieg, some kamikaze, committed on the swelling genitalia of the flowers, the fruiting body? To cut off the seed pods is supposed to make the bulb store energy. Saint Serena on her knees, doing penance. So let's consider some key symbols in that passage. First of all, she describes the tulips shedding their petals one by one like teeth. And I want you to think about that very strange simile, shedding their petals like teeth. Well, we shed our teeth in dreams, don't we, in nightmares? And if you have a dream about your teeth falling out, it symbolizes your vulnerability. So in other words, when she talks about shedding the petals one by one like teeth, this is a symbol of fear. She's frightened. And then we see Serena Joy snipping off the seed pods of the plants in this beautiful garden with a pair of shears. And it just seems very, very violent. She has this sharp blade and she's cutting these beautiful flowers. And it seems to me to symbolize violence. And then we get these two foreign words, blitzkrieg and kamikaze. Blitzkrieg is a German word which found its way into English from the Second World War. It means lightning war. It was a word Hitler used to describe invading a country very, very quickly using a lot of tanks. And then kamikaze is a Japanese word which means a suicide attack, a very, very violent, very brutal form of warfare. Once again, this is a natural scene. They're in the garden. They're looking at the flowers. They're gardening, and June is admiring nature. But within this beautiful natural scene, we have Serena snipping the flowers with a sharp blade, and then we have these words to do with brutal, violent warfare. We'll return to those ideas, but let's read the next bit. I often amused myself this way, with small-minded bitter jokes about her, but not for long. It doesn't do to linger, watching Serena Joy from behind. What I coveted was the shears. Well, then we had the irises, rising beautiful and cool on their tall stalks like blown glass, like pastel water momentarily frozen in a splash, light blue, light mauve, and the darker ones velvet and purple. Black cat's ears in the sun, indigo shadow and their bleeding hearts. So female in shape it was a surprise they'd not long since been rooted out. First of all, we get a glimpse, don't we, into June's thoughts and feelings. Serena Joy is one of the people who keeps her captive and forces this life upon her. And so it's not surprising to us that she resents her. And on the surface, she's respectful to her, but latent beneath the surface is this hatred, this resentment. What June really wants is the shears. She wants a weapon that she can use on Serena Joy in order to get her revenge on the people who've tortured her, but also to make her escape from her captivity. And then we get more of these very, very detailed descriptions of nature, in particular the flowers, the plants, and their beauty, their bright colours. It's just interesting, bleeding hearts perhaps is a powerful symbol of June's sadness. And then we get this great phrase, so female in shape, it was a surprise they'd not long since been rooted out. And this suggests to us, doesn't it, that anything that looks female is in some way controlled or destroyed. So it's a powerful symbol. We'll return to these ideas in a short while. The commander and I have an arrangement. It's not the first such arrangement in history, though the shape it's taken is not the usual one. I visit the commander 2 or 3 nights a week, always after dinner, but only when I get the signal. The signal is Nick. If he's polishing the car when I set out for the shopping, or when I come back, and if his hat is on askew or not at all, then I go. If he isn't there, or if he has his hat on straight, then I stay in my room in the ordinary way. On ceremony nights, of course, none of this applies. First of all, June has to spend a lot of time sneaking around, doesn't she? The commander and I excuse me, have an arrangement. It's not the first such arrangement in history. And what June is alluding to here is the way women have always had to negotiate men and their desires and their feelings in order to survive. And so you could say that June here is a little bit like Juliet, having to manage the emotions of Romeo and her father, or perhaps a character from a Shakespearean comedy, having to survive in a man's world. The signal. Again, this is secrecy, isn't it? If this was an ancient romance, it would be romantic, but here it doesn't seem very romantic at all. Okay, so this is a pastoral scene. What that means is that it's set in the countryside, and it looks at ideas about people and their relationship to nature. And when you notice that, when you notice an idea, the best thing to do is search your mind for, what do you already know about the pastoral? Well, pastoral poetry and pastoral love stories are as old as literature itself. And if you lived in a city like Athens 3,000 years ago, life was quite hard. You had to worry about politics, and you had to worry about money, and you had to worry about debt, and you had to worry about where you live, and you had to worry about a job, and you had to worry about disease and overcrowding. But if you were to take a stroll 5 minutes out of the city, you'd be in broad countryside where the olives were farmed, and where the sheep were farmed, and where the wheat was farmed. And people from cities would romanticize living in the countryside, or getting out to the countryside, where you might fall in love with a young innocent shepherd boy. And there are so many ancient Greek poems about ladies falling in love with shepherd boys outside of the city that it's almost parody. And then this idea feeds into, the Garden of Eden. It's called the garden, and we think of a garden as a place where we lie in the sun or, have a pond or whatever. But traditionally, a garden is somewhere where food is grown. And so when God creates the world, he creates a garden and puts people in it. The idea being that people are custodians of the countryside and of nature. It's their job to look after it. And God's garden is a paradise. There is no violence, there's no work, there's no hardship. All they have to do is follow a few simple rules and they can have anything they want. So that's important to keep in mind. Moving forward in history a little bit to Shakespeare, you would have read A Midsummer Night's Dream lower down the school. And just like those ancient Greek ladies, the lovers escape the authoritarian rule in the city of Athens in order to be together in nature, in the forest, which is where they go to fall in love. Moving forward again to the 19th century and England, and there was a movement against the Industrial Revolution, and looking back to simpler times when life was simple. The painting right there is The Hay Wain by John Constable, and it is a nostalgic scene of innocent, idyllic countryside life. There's no pollution, there's no overcrowding, there's just a simple man with his simple horse and his simple cart living a simple rural life. And this idea was taken right into the 20th century. And, maybe your parents are old enough to remember a television program called The Darling Buds of May, which is about a city person who goes to the countryside and learns what life is really all about. And of course, what life is really all about is having a good time, finding love and having fun. And that's what The Darling Buds of May is all about. The line itself is taken from Shakespeare. Moving on a little bit, you can think about Romeo and Juliet. When they first meet, when they fall in love, it's done in the Capulet orchard. Because traditionally, gardens were female space. In the medieval hall, the Great Hall was male space, dominated by the Lord. But the garden was female space where a woman would go to pray, she would go to think, she would go there to meet a lover or to fall in love. And so gardens have this very, very strong association with female sexuality. And on the left there we see an illustration of what I'm talking about. We have an ancient Greek farmer outside the city walls, living a simple life, growing food for the people in the city. So all this pastoral imagery, this garden and all these flowers, well, what does it symbolize? Well, all those things we've been talking about. First of all, it symbolizes love. The countryside was where you would go to meet your lover, away from the prying eyes of your father or your husband or the laws of the city. The countryside was where you would breed animals and you would breed plants to grow and to use for food. And so the countryside has always represented sexuality and fertility. The countryside was a place where you could be free. It was outside the walls of the city, and therefore you weren't subject to laws, you were not under surveillance, and you could go there and you could do what you wanted and say what you wanted. It also meant adventure. It was also meant innocence. It meant a simple and moral and wholesome way of life. Just like the Garden of Eden, or paradise as we call it. And the countryside also means beauty. The countryside is full of plants and animals that we like because they're beautiful. And when we go on holiday to the beach because we want to see the sea because it's natural, or we climb a mountain because we want to be away from people and in nature, or we visit the countryside in order to take in some of this freedom, some of this beauty. Okay, well, that's the end of part one, and I will return in the next section and we'll look at the extract in more detail.